Many people during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, each day there's a minhag. They'll study a different chapter of the Rambam. There's 10 days, so each day is a different parak of the Rambam Hilchos Tshuva. Today what we're going to be doing is analyzing Perek Daled, the 4th chapter. It's a fascinating parak, because what does it deal with? It deals with those issues that prevent tshuva from taking place, that are ma'akev tshuva. What does the Rambam say? There are 24 phenomena that preclude the possibility of tshuva. And the Rambam breaks it up into 5 categories. What we're going to do is we're actually going to do some of the later halachas first, and then we'll move back. What does the Rambam mean? So let's take, for instance, halacha gimel. Okay? Let's take halacha gimel first, and I apologize. Halacha gimel, you'll see on the English, there's a large 3, and it's missing a gimel on the Hebrew. It was cut off. So what does it say? It says, umehem chamisha devarim. There are 5 phenomena, 5 of the 24. Ha'osa osan, that someone who does these phenomena, efshar lo sheyashuv b'tshuva gemura. Why is it impossible? He says it's impossible for a person to be able to do complete tshuva. Why? Lefi shehem avonosha bein adam lechavero. Because these sins relate to relationships between one human being and another. Ve'enu yodea chavero shechata lo kedei sheyachzer lo o yishal mimeno limcha lo. What happens? You don't know who you've offended. Since you don't know who you've offended, how can you ask for forgiveness? We know that with Yom Kippur, it says, Mikol chatosechem lifnei Hashem titaru. You can be purified, you can be transformed for the sins that you committed before God, not for the sins that were done between your fellow human being. Meaning what? That if you've sinned against your fellow human being, there's an obligation to be miratzah, not just to ask for forgiveness, but to try to restore the relationship. To restore and appease a person to such a degree that they have the confidence in you. It's as if you have the same relationship before the violation, before the person lied to you, before the person stole from you. That's the degree the person has to try to do tshuva. The problem is if you've offended someone and you don't know who you've offended, how can you ever ask forgiveness? So look at some of the examples the Rambam gives here in Perek Daled Halacha Gimel. The first one, Hamikalal es harabim, velo kila adam yadua kedei sheyishal mimeno kapara. You curse the masses. It's not like you cursed a certain individual, you curse the masses. I'll give you an example. We used to live in California. So many of those who escaped after the revolution of the Ayatollah, after the downfall of the Shah, many of them escaped and came to Southern California. Many of the Persian Jews from Shiraz, from Isfahan, from Tehran, from Kashan, Mashhad, the different communities within Persia. Many of them came to Great Neck, Long Island. But what happens? There's a clash because the Ashkenazic community is coming from quote-unquote a European background, and there's a certain way in which a European or an American will do business. There's a certain way in which a European or an American will give weight to the spoken word. In other cultures in the world, Middle Eastern cultures, Persian Gulf cultures, that's not the case. Let me give you an example. Yasser Arafat violated and broke the Oslo Accords. And what happens? The world gets upset at Yasser Arafat. He's a scoundrel, he's a liar, he's a dirtbag, he's a person who has no integrity. If you talk to people in the Middle East, they're not upset at Yasser Arafat, they're upset at Shimon Peres and at Yitzhak Rabin. Why? You should know better. The way that these people do business, the culture of business is we start negotiating after the contract's signed. After the contract's signed, that's when we're going to start. Now we'll discuss negotiations. And the fact that you project yourselves onto them, shame on you. You were foolish. You were naive. You were gullible. You have to know how business is done and how they conduct affairs. What's the point? People in this clash between the Persian culture in Beverly Hills and we call it the Ashkenazic or the European American culture, a major clash in terms of business negotiations, in terms of negotiations after the contract is signed, in terms of, for instance, no such thing as paying retail. No such thing as if an institution says these are the dues and this is the charge. That's a point of negotiation. It's not a given, no matter how wealthy one is. Because if you're coming from a negotiating culture, you look at the world differently. So what happens? People respond and they start, the Persians, they attack the Persians, right? They make these blanket statements against Persians. There's a problem with that. You're going to fly to Iran? You're going to go to Isfahan and Shiraz and ask Mechila because you've just cursed out the Persian Jewish community? Are you going to go to Great Neck? Do you know where every Persian who lives in Great Neck? What about Persian Jews who live in Columbus and Jacksonville and Kansas City? How can you ever ask Mechila when you curse out the Persians? Let me give you another example. People, they make certain comments about the Hungarians, right? You're going to find where every Hungarian Jew lives? There are Hungarians throughout Israel. There are Hungarians throughout America, Australia. How are you going to find where they live? You don't know. You don't know. They don't wear a sign saying, I'm a Hungarian Jew or I'm a Jew of Hungarian descent. How do you find them to ask Mechila? And it's not just to Jews. What about the Gentiles? People make comments about the blacks, the African American community, the Latinos, the Italian community. If you curse a man, how can you ever get mechila for that? How can you ever be forgiven when you don't even know how to ask forgiveness from the people you've cursed because you don't know where they are? So that's an example the Rambam gives. Another example of something which is a sin bein adam lechavero, a sin between one human being and another, and you don't know how to ask forgiveness. Listen to the example he gives. It's actually the second example. Hacholek im ganav, someone who divides up the spoils with a thief. Shelafi she'eno yodea geneva zu shalmihi. Imagine this scenario. You want a Bose speaker system for your automobile. So what do? Instead of paying retail or instead of going to the internet and ordering it, you go to a chop shop in Queens. Now, they don't say that they're a chop shop, but they're selling almost perfect condition. You're not asking where they got it from. But the reality is, you know full well, they're getting their merchandise from people who break into automobiles, who break into vehicles. And yeah, so what happens? What are you doing? You're doing a number of things. You're creating a market for stolen goods. You are creating a market for, so you're being mechazek, you're strengthening the crooks, the thieves. Why? Because they know they can steal and they can sell. Why does someone steal something? So they can sell it, get a value. It's a parnasa also, right? Being a ganav. And what happens? You're creating that market for them. So that's number one. Number two is, how do you know now who to ask forgiveness for? You don't know the victim. Whose automobile was this stolen from?
Are you responsible for that?
You're responsible because when you know or you have a very strong suspicion that these are stolen goods, you can't partake of that. Got a real issue there. So what have you done? You've been mechazek, number one. You've been mechazek the people in the chop shop business. You've been mechazek the ganavim. And nebuch, you're the reason of a cause for agmas nefesh, for all those victims whose cars were broken into. How do you ask forgiveness? Let's turn the page. Rambam gives another example. Hamikabel shochad, this is example hey, the fifth of the 5 examples. Hamikabel shochad lahatos dins. So we're going to describe it in terms of a judge, then let's talk about you and I. If a judge accepts a bribe, in the English it's letter E, in the Hebrew letter Hey. A judge who accepts a bribe, what is the word shochad? The Gemara in Ksuba says it's an acronym, shehu chad. You become one with the person. And now, by the way, a bribe doesn't have to be financial. There's all different types of bribes in life. They could give your son a job. They could take good care of your mother. They could do all kinds of things. What happens? You have, and it's much more powerful when it's on a subconscious or an unconscious level, you have a negia, a subconscious negia to such a person. That's very dangerous. You know why? Because you don't even know yourself To what degree are you supporting this person as opposed to the other litigant? To what degree are you facilitating this person's success when you're supposed to be practicing equality and equity? Now, most of us are not judges, right? Most of us, our profession is not to be a judge. We're not wearing the cloak and gown. We don't have the gavel. But we are judges. Every one of us is a judge. Where do we reside? Where's our gavel? Where's our cloak?
In our daily lives.
That's right, in the courtroom of the mind, right? In the courtroom of the mind, we are constantly sitting in judgment. We shouldn't. We try our best not to. But I'll give you an example. When you see how a person is dressed and what they're wearing, so you're already making a judgment about the person. When you see how a person carries their body, you know, they bent over, they act, you're already making judgments about their personality, you know, how they look at you, are their shoes shined. We're always sitting and making judgments about each other. I'm not saying it's correct. I'm saying it happens. The problem is this. When you sit, okay, and we're supposed to treat everyone equal. Everyone is B'Tselem Elokim, right? Everyone partakes of the humanity, of the divine image. When it comes to our fellow brothers and sisters, our fellow Jews, they're all brothers and sisters. They're all called Achiv. Yet sometimes, you know what happens? Some are more equal than others, right? Some we're going to give a warm greeting, B'Sever Panim Yafos. Some, you know, our face is in the BlackBerry, right? Some say, hello, how are you? Please don't answer me, you know, I'm just doing that to be nice, right? Some say, hey, how are you? And you really are concerned with, how are you? Tell me what's happening in your life. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's not a simple thing. So let's just read the Rambam again. If you're mekabel shochad lahatos din. Now again, if it's a scenario where it's a judge, it's a perversion of justice. You're actually perverting. But again, for each and every one of us, right, we have a responsibility to be mekabel kol adam b'sever panim yafos, to show dignity to everyone. We don't have to be best friends with everyone, that we're not obligated. But to be a mensch, we are. And a lot of times, you know, it happens very often. You know, you're in a line or you see a bunch of people. This one you're going to give a more of an excited hello to, a more greater embrace to than that one. It affects the other people.
So you can't take presents, a gift?
You can take presents. There's a general principle, sone matanos yichya. In an ideal world, King Solomon says the person who despises, who doesn't want to take gifts, that person will live. In other words, because the point is, you're not needy, you're not always trying to ingratiate yourself to someone. So that's an ideal, not to accept gifts, or not to be looking for gifts. You can definitely take gifts unless you're a judge. Unless you're officially a judge, then you can't. Because you have a subconscious bias towards the person. You're dependent upon that person. You have what's called a shibud.
Give gifts
to a judge.
But you're saying everyone is a judge. We all judge.
Right. So I'm saying the technical definition is a judge. We make a distinction between a judge and someone who's not a judge. But what we're doing is we're extending the principle of the Rambam to each and every one of us.
So taking that the way you're doing it, is it giving shochat to give a gift? Or is it hakaras hatov?
It depends what you want from the person. I'll give you an example. Let's take a scenario of a rabbi. Now, we all know in a shul, if it's a healthy shul, 20% of the population is supporting the shul, primarily. Many shuls, it's 10%. The same thing with day schools. Now, on the one hand, everyone should be equal, right? All congregants. But you know what? You couldn't have programs for seniors. You couldn't have programs for kids. You couldn't have the serious adult education programs. You couldn't have the Israel activism if it wasn't for the 10% or the 20%. They're the ones who are, it's not coming from basic dues. Okay, that pays what? 30%, 40, 50% of the operations. It's coming from the 10 to 20% of the population. So what happens? It's very difficult as a rabbi or as a principal of a day school not to have a bias. Again, we're talking about the most profound and powerful biases is when it's on a subtle level towards the family that's funding the institution. The institution wouldn't exist without that family. And what happens? Because of that, you end up giving them better treatment than others. They're more equal than others. It's a real challenge. It's not, what I'm trying to say is, the principle technically applies to a judge, but the concept and the principle can be extended to many, many others.
So you could be guilty of a lot
So yeah, let's go to the next halacha. Halacha Daled. Okay, the 4 in the English, the Daled in the Hebrew. The Rambam has another category, which also has 5 examples. The Rambam says like this: Umehen chamisha dvarim. There are 5 phenomena, 5 sins. Ha'osa osan, ein cheskasa lashuv mehen. If someone engages in these practices, chances are they're not going to do tshuva. Why do we assume they won't do tshuva? They won't repent. Lefi shem dvarim kalim be'enei rov ha'adam. Because you don't think there's anything wrong with them. You can only do tshuva, you can only repent if you think you've done something wrong or you've offended someone. V'nim sachote, what happens? You end up sinning, v'hu yadama she'en zachet, and you don't think you've done anything wrong. Let's take a couple of examples. Look at example Gimel. In the English, example C. So we know in Shema it says, Lo sasuru acharei levavchem v'acharei inechem. You're not supposed to veer or follow after your eyes. What's the Rambam's example? We say that in Shema every morning, every evening. The Rambam example is hamistakel ba'arayos. Someone who stares, doesn't mean who sees, but who stares at someone who's an erva, another woman. You say, what did I do wrong? It's one of God's most beautiful creations. There's Niagara Falls, there's Yosemite, and there's this beautiful woman. Did I hurt anybody? All I did was look. Right? I didn't touch her. I didn't say anything inappropriate. And a person doesn't realize that that's very wrong. Why? Why? See, one of the great failures of what we'll call the feminist movement of the 70s, with all they were trying to do, I think probably their greatest failure was that if anything, in the aftermath of that feminist movement, men look at women today to a much greater degree than they did before that as an object and not as a subject. And woe to us that if you look at a woman as an object and not a subject. You know, today with Madison Avenue, you can't sell a car, you can't sell a stereo system, you can't sell anything without a woman, you know, who's presented in a certain seductive way. And that's a tragedy, because what happens is, how is a relationship between 2 men for the most part? The relationship is platonic. It's a function of what's this gentleman's personality like? What's this person's mind like? It's a meeting of 2 minds, a meeting of 2 psyches, 2 personalities. When it comes to a woman, all of a sudden you don't define the relationship in terms of what? Her intellect, her personality. All of a sudden she becomes an object. And even if you don't touch the other woman, it's unhealthy, it's sick and unhealthy that that's how you relate to another human being. So what's wrong with just staring at her, violating lo tatura? You don't think you're doing anything wrong. I didn't touch, I didn't say anything. Wrong. There's something very wrong. And that's why the Torah says lo tatura. But if you don't realize you're doing something wrong, how can you ever do tshuva? How can you ever repent? Another example the Rambam gives, very relevant to our world and our society. The 4th example, Daled. Hamitkabed or hamiskabed biklon chavero. Someone who builds themselves up through the denigration of someone else. Let's use the example today of, again, Madison Avenue marketing. Let's use a better example of political campaigns. What is the word kavod or hamitkabed? You know what the word kavod comes from? Honor? It comes from the word kaved. Heavy. I treat myself as being heavy, significant, worthy. How? By making you kal, by making you light, by denigrating you and putting you down. I build myself up by putting you down. Let's think about some of the examples. There was a famous ad campaign. It was an ad done by a company by the name of Baby Oragel. You know, when you have the scenario of if you have children or grandchildren like this, where the children are teething or the children are cranky or they have a cold. So, to the best of my knowledge, it's still true today. We don't have a medication that is at the same time fast-acting and at the same time long-lasting. Certain meds are fast-acting, but as quick as they relieve the symptoms, so too does it wear off. Others are long-lasting. It takes a time for those meds to kick in, but once they kick in, they last. So imagine now this image. There's a picture, there's an ad, the same baby. It's split down the middle. Baby, same baby here, same baby there. In this picture, the baby's bawling, it's crying its head off. In this picture, the baby's happy. 10 minutes after taking baby Oragel is a happy baby. 10 minutes after taking children's Tylenol is a crying baby. What the ad doesn't tell you is that 25 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes, 2 hours later, if we would take the exact same picture, the baby Oragel baby is back crying again. The children's Tylenol baby is happy. Why? Because even though Tylenol takes longer to kick in, it's not fast acting, it's long lasting. And they did a study of consumers. They asked the mothers of these toddlers, of these infants, what would you rather have? These are the only two drugs that are on the market. We don't have something that does it all. It was overwhelmingly, they'd rather have long lasting. That once it kicks in, it stays. So it was deceptive and dishonest. The commercial, very successful commercial, but what Baby Oragel did to children's Tylenol is deceptive and dishonest. You want to say you're the fastest acting pain relief, the fastest acting, infant teething relief. You want to say that? Great. You can build yourself up, but not at the denigration of your competitor. What happens with political campaigns? It's all about denigrating the opponent. Think about this in business. Whether you're a doctor, whether you're a service provider, how about in the world of religion, in shuls, especially in the neighborhood where there are too many shuls? How about day schools, right? Right now we're all suffering financially, we're all hurting because of the economy and because of the fact that parents can't afford day school tuition. So there's that tendency. You don't just say, you know what, thank God, we've got the best math scores, or thank God, on the objective BJE exam getting into high school, the Tanakh scores were the best from this yeshiva. We're very proud of that. That's okay. You can talk about your strengths. What you can't do is you can't compare and contrast yourself to the others, even if it's true. We're talking about a case, you say, I'm not lying, I'm telling the truth. You can't build yourself up by denigrating or putting down, setting up the other as a foible. You can't do that. And you don't think you're doing anything wrong. Why don't you think you're doing anything wrong? Because I'm not lying, I'm telling the truth. Doesn't matter that you're not lying. Doesn't matter that you're telling the truth.
Here it's saying when he's not there, when he's not present.
Right.
You can't do it either. Why?
Right. Either way, you can't do it. Either way, you can't do it.
Even if he's not there.
You're saying, well, I'm not embarrassing him. I'm not hurting his feelings. I'm not embarrassing him. But you denigrated. You put him down. You cost his reputation. Yeah. Next example. What is another dvarim kalim? The Rambam said. It's light. You don't think you're doing anything wrong. So you end up sinning, but you didn't realize you sinned. What's another example? Hachoshed biksherin. You suspect someone who's kasher, who has a status of being fine in this area. You say, what did I do wrong? I didn't say one word. I didn't say what they did. I didn't attack them. I didn't say any negative things. I didn't act upon it. I just, in the courtroom of my mind, I kept it to myself. It's between me and God. I thought it. That's wrong. That's wrong. I'll give you an example. You see someone on the highway. They're going, instead of waiting to come to Teaneck to Chickies, they go to Popeyes. You see them going into Popeyes. You didn't see them coming out with any food. You saw them going in there. Or you saw them going into McDonald's. Exactly. Maybe they had to use the facilities. Maybe their cell phone ran out, the battery ran out, they need to make a call from a payphone. Maybe they're a diabetic. Because of the insulin, they overdid it. Now they have to take some sugar. There's many reasons why they could be going into McDonald's or Popeyes. If we know someone has the status of, let's say, in this case, keeping kosher, you can't assume. You have to do one of these. You have to go out of your way to rationalize that what they did was for a legitimate reason. Dan lekavskos. So you say, I didn't say anything negative about it. I didn't even act upon it. It doesn't matter. In your mind, once you've come to a conclusion in your mind, right, it shapes the way how you look at another human being. And by the way, it goes back to the whole problem. There's only one judge in the universe, and that's the Almighty. There's certain times in halacha we have to have a judiciary. You know why? Because otherwise you'd have anarchy. Without that, there'd be anarchy in all over the world. So we allow, it's a necessary evil. That's why there's a Beis Din of 3 for financial law. There's a Beis Din of 23 that can deal with criminal law. It's primarily not a Beis Din, it's primarily a yeshiva. It's the think tank of the community. But in order to prevent anarchy, we have a judicial system. But it's not an ideal. In a perfect world, and we don't live in a perfect world, in a perfect world there's only one judge, and that's the Almighty. The only one who can judge a human being is God, no one else. What's the point? What's the point? Even if all I'm doing is sitting there, thank you, even if all I'm doing is judging in my mind, I'm not acting upon it, there's something wrong. No human being has the right to sit and judge. Now it's an interesting phrase. I'm just going to finish this point. Yeah, that's the point here. There's the phrase hachoshed biksherim. What is the word kesherim? Kosher. Meaning, I'll give you an example. Let's say someone is definitively, clearly, blatantly violates this area of law. You know the person's a ganav. You don't have to always try to figure out a way of why he's not really stealing. If you know and it's clear and it's obvious that they're a thief, so then you don't have to do this. Let's say someone you know, they violate Shabbos publicly. You don't have to go out of your way to say, well, they're really keeping Shabbos, it must just be an emergency, they're going to the hospital. Then you don't have to do that. It's where someone has the status of a kosher. They have the status of someone who observes this ethical, moral point. They observe this theological point. That's where you have no right to. See, you don't have to lie. You don't have to do things that are absurd. But once someone has the status, then you have to go out of your way to be meritorious. I'm going to give you an example. You want to hear an amazing example? There's an issue that we talk about, and that is that many of the children in the yeshiva, they keep Shabbos. They don't drive on Shabbos. You don't see them, defiantly turning lights on Shabbos, but they text. They're addicted to the text. So what happens? A parent gets the bill, and they see that on the Shabbos, 5:30, 5:45, 6 o'clock, 6:15, and Shabbos didn't get out till 8:15 that night. And they look at who they texting, etc. Those are real numbers, or numbers of friends. And the parents, are just crying. They're devastated that their kid violates Shabbos. They're taking away the phone. They're going, they don't know what the next steps they're going to take. And the kid promises, and they're swearing, I didn't violate Shabbos. I didn't text on Shabbos. I promise you'll wait until after Shabbos. And the parents have already said, look, you text Shabbos. I got the facts in front of me. Yeah. So
incoming text, maybe someone texted.
Well, I'm right now. We got on the computer. It shows who they texted, who they received the text from. It's right there. So what happens? The mother goes and she says, "Well, wait a second. Is this kid also breaking the Shabbos? They don't strike me as a family. Is this one? Wait a second. And this is not even a kid. This is somebody we know very well." The mother goes now and looks at her own texts. 6 o'clock, 6:20. That's Shabbos. It says she texted. She knows she didn't text on Shabbos. In her text, she's being billed for and these are texts that she made. So what happens? They found out the company that was providing the service, the billing center is on Pacific time. 5:35 was 8:35. Shabbos got out at 8:20 or 8:15, something like that. The first text was 5:35, which is 8:35. The mother now looks at her text. 5:40, which is 8:40. 6:20, which was 9:20. So here they were devastated. They assumed the kid, was texting. And they even had the goods. They weren't like making it up. They had the goods. When someone has the status of a kosher, you have to do this. When they don't have the status of a kosher, then you're not obligated to be foolish.
So they didn't do it, the kid?
The kid didn't do it.
Oh,
Kid didn't do it. It was all a function of what? Of that the billing company was from Pacific time, and these people lived on Eastern time. Let's go to the next Rambam. What's the next category the Rambam has? Halacha Hey. It's the back page. The Rambam has 5 examples in this category as well. Umehen chamisha devarim ha'osa osam yimashech achareim tamid v'kashim heim lifrosh mehen. These are not activities. These are certain character traits, proclivities, psychological, personality makeup. Very hard to break from them. What are some of the examples? First that he gives, he calls v'hein kulan deos ra'os. These are all very bad character traits. So look at one that he gives. Rechilus. What's rechilus? You know what that is? And we have a Yiddish word for it. It's called being a yenta. What is a rechilus? What is a yenta? Do you know where so-and-so had Shabbos lunch yet? Do you know where so-and-so is going on vacation? Do you know what car they're leasing or what they're buying? Do you know where they're shopping? You know what I mean? Do you know? Yeah. You're not saying anything that's inherently negative. You're just talking about other people. You're saying things that it's your nature. And see, they say great people talk about ideas, principles, values. Let's talk about concepts and ideas. Small people talk about other people. So that's it's psychologically, it's a terrible trait that your whole focus is on other people. The second is Lashon Hara. What's Lashon Hara? That's where you're saying negative, derogatory attack, character assassination. What's the problem with Lashon Hara? Why would I say Lashon Hara about you?
Because it makes you feel better.
Exactly. What's happening? I'm really threatened. What's the flaw in my personality? We didn't analyze it with Rechilas, but let's talk about Lashon Hara for a second. I'm an insecure person. I'm threatened by you. I'm threatened by a lot of people. And the only way I can build myself up is by putting you down. The only way I can feel good about myself is by cutting you down. That's that's an unhealthy character trait. Very hard to do tshuva from that. You know the famous line of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter? He said it's easier to learn Gans Shas than to change Amida. Amida means a character trait. Why? Because it becomes part and parcel. It defines you. It's who you are. So it takes a tremendous amount of work. Another example, this Bal Chema, a person who has anger management problems, right? Can't control. You have this rage in you, and you can't control yourself. You have a short fuse. It's very challenging to change that. Let's think, I want to skip Bal Machshava Rabbi. Let's say Mischaber La Rasha. What does that mean literally? Someone who befriends, you become close with people that are wicked. You learn from their actions. I'm going to just give you an example. You know how in America, who's America's favorite son? Tony Soprano. Why does America have this infatuation with The Godfather, with the Goodfellas, with Tony Soprano? What is it? What's the idea there? Basically, you know what it is? These people that love this stuff, that get geschmack out of it, they enjoy it, they analyze it, they're never going to miss them. If they miss it, they got to videotape it and watch it. What's the idea? That person would also like to break the law. That person would also like to have the kind of control that if you wrong me, I'll squash you, I'll physically destroy you. They really love it, and they won't do it because of pasnish. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want people should look at me as a gangster. But they really, deep down, they live vicariously through Tony Soprano. They live vicariously through Don Vito Corleone. You understand? What's mischaber la Rasha? So there's 2 ideas. One is, why do you love this person? I'm not talking about where you're trying to makar them, you're trying to make them a better person, you're trying to work. I'm talking about where you love them for who they are. That's why the word chaver is from chibur. There's an attachment between the two of you. Why? Because basically you live vicariously. Because of certain, social protocol, you wouldn't do it, but you live vicariously through them. And then the point that the Rambam makes is, you learn from them. We all are a product of our environment. Very few people are true philosophers. Most of us, via osmosis, we are products of our environment. And the problem with befriending someone like that is it rubs off on you. I'll give you an example. We had a student. He worked in the post office one summer, had to earn a living, had to make parnasa. And the people working in that post office, they weren't from the Lamed Vav Tzadikim. They weren't a member of that club. Just the language this kid had when he came back, when he came back to school, he's a good kid. But his language was a different, he didn't even realize it. You're a product of your environment. what language people use, you know, what kind of jokes they tell. Yeah. We're gonna go back to the Rambam. We have time to go back to the first two sections of the Rambam, but let's just review these last three. The first we said is when you certain sins against your fellow human being that you don't have the ability, because you don't know either where they are, who they are, or you don't know how far that you've hurt them, you don't have the ability to ask mechila. How do you get tshuva if you don't get forgiveness? God can be mochel you, but Hashem is not mochel us when we offended another human being. So if you don't know where they are to do tshuva, or to what degree you've hurt them, so you can't, how do you get forgiveness? That was category number, the first one we did, halacha gimel. The second category, halacha daled, was what? There's certain things, we don't think we're doing anything wrong. Let me give you, I want to take a minute to develop halacha daled one more time. We have a term in Hebrew. In the Torah we get this term, shogeg. What's shogeg? Negligence. See, they translate it as accident. That's actually ones. You know what an accident is? That's an ones. An accident would be this. I tripped and bumped into a light on Shabbos. That was an accident. That's ones. Or you bumped into me and I bumped into the light. That's an accident. That's ones. What's shogeg? Shogeg is translated as negligence. There's two types of negligence. We're going to do two types of shogeg. And by the way, the word chet, chatasi, is for a sin due to negligence. Type 1 of shogeg is this. I failed to study, I failed to learn. Chet is the sin that was done b'shogeg. Chet literally means I missed the mark. I was negligent. You know, it means I missed the target. So let's talk. There are two types of chatayim. There are two types of sins due to negligence. One is this. I didn't study the Chavetz Chaim Shmiras HaLashon. I didn't read. So I think I'm saying things that are totally permissible. I'm not lying, you know. You're not there, so you're not offended and insulted. All kinds of excuses I'm making. In the meantime, I'm guilty of Lashon Hara. I'm guilty of character. Not because I tended to hurt you, because I think it's okay. I didn't know. I didn't study. I didn't learn. That's not an excuse. I could buy the books. I could go to a rabbi to learn, to a shiur to learn this. I could even call in, you know, you can call in for the halachos.
Negligence is conscious?
So negligence, there's two types of negligence. One is failed to be educated. I failed to study. I failed to learn. And because of that, that's what the Rambam says, Dvarim Kalim. You think that's okay. You think it's permissible to look at a woman this way. You didn't touch her. You didn't say anything. You think it's permissible to judge another person because you're not saying anything negative about him. You're not acting upon it. It's just in your mind, right? You didn't know that it's wrong. Remember the Rambam said, how can you do tshuva if you don't think you did anything wrong? If I didn't think I sinned. So there's two types of shogeg. One is I failed to learn. I'll give you an example. On Shabbos, I didn't realize that there are certain things you could put back on the certain parts of the stove. You could put. I didn't realize all the distinctions between yad soletis bo, where there's a chiyuv for cooking, for heating something up. What's not yad soletis bo. I didn't realize the difference between a liquid and a solid. A solid, once it's cooked, it's already been cooked. A liquid is, if it's gravy, it can be cooked again. So what I didn't realize. I didn't study that there are nuances, there are subtleties, and how to observe the laws of bishul on Shabbos, hachzara, returning something, and I didn't learn them. And I violated the Shabbos. Not because I did it on purpose, because I didn't think there was anything wrong. That's a shogeg, that's a chet, that's a sin due to negligence, because I failed to learn. Then there's a second type of negligence. I'll give you an example. It's the classic negligence in the Torah. You and I refer to it as the sin that generates a consequence of ir miklat. When I kill someone due to negligence, I have to go into exile, into a city of refuge. I have to go into Gullus, into the ir miklat, the city of refuge. What happens? I have a car. An automobile is a weapon. An automobile is a weapon, okay? The speed limit said there's a school in this neighborhood, there are children in this neighborhood, drive 25 miles an hour. I'm in a rush, I drive 40 miles an hour. God forbid a child runs out and you kill the child. You didn't mean to kill him, but when you drive a car where they say it's a 25 mile an hour speed limit, so that way you can slam on the brake and stop the car right away. You can't do that at 40 miles an hour. Car won't stop that quick. I didn't mean to kill him. No, that's negligence. Because an automobile is a weapon, it's a dangerous weapon, and it has to be treated with a sense of security and a sense of seriousness. That's negligence. It wasn't mazed, it's negligence. So there's two types of negligence. One is fail to educate myself, like example, the laws of Shabbos or Borah, the laws of Lashon Hara. I failed to educate myself. There's a second type of negligence. I was negligent. Wasn't careful. I wasn't serious in how I treated this object. That's the Rambam in Halacha Daled. In Halacha Hey, we said, what are things that are very difficult to do tshuva from? Where it's the nature of my personality. I'm a yenta. I've got anger management issues. You know what I mean? I'm a person who's insecure and threatened. So it's hard to do tshuva because it requires a total transformation of the personality. It's not like just stop this action. The Rav used to say, what's the difference between the vidoy ha'aruch and the vidoy ha'katzar? You know, on Yom Kippur, we do the Ashamnu Bagadnu Gazanu. That's the vidoy ha'katzar, the shortened read, because for every letter of the aleph base is one word or two words. And then there's Al Chetcha Chatanu Lifanecha, for the sin that we did before you with this, with that, which is much more elongated. What's the difference? The vidoy ha'aruch is for this action, for this activity, for this mistake. The vidoy ha'katzar is where it's personality. What's latznu? A cynic. I'm sarcastic, I'm cynical. It's not a specific action, there's a flaw in the personality. You understand? Laziness, cheap. It's not a specific action, there's a flaw in the personality. Okay, those are the three Gimel, Daled, and Hey. We have a little bit of time. Let's go back, please. And I'm going to go quickly through them. Halacha Aleph was the first category. The Rambam says, the first page, Parak Daled Halacha Aleph, Arba mehen avon gadol. It's a great sin. Va'osa echad mehen ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu maspik biyado lasas tshuva lefi godel cheto. Sometimes the sin is so great that God providentially, you know, tshuva is only because Hashem helps us. You know, if I buy a stock and I lose a fortune on that stock, the market crashes, I can't say, I want my money back. If I knew it was going to go down, I wouldn't have bought the stock. You can't do that. But what does tshuva say? You can undo time. You can go and you can undo something that's already been done. It's an amazing chesed. It's one of the greatest acts of chesed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, is the ability to do teshuva. What about, I'll give the example of Yeravam ben Nevat. He's the poster child. Let's just, the example is Hamachati es harabim, the Rambam's first example in Halacha Aleph. Someone who causes the masses to sin. What's the example of Hamachati es harabim? Yeravam ben Nevat does the following. He's in charge of 10 out of the 12 tribes. Rechavam is Shlomo Melech's son. He's, you know, what did Lloyd Benson say to Dan Quayle? You're no JFK, right? Well, Rechavam has his milas, but he's no Shlomo HaMelech. He's not like his father. He's no David HaMelech. He's not like his grandfather. And Yeravam ben Nevat cannot tolerate that for the holidays, for the Shalosh Regalim, when everybody comes to Yerushalayim, Yeravam ben Nevat has to stand like everybody else. And you know what? This young whippersnapper, this young punk, he sits in the Azara of the Beis HaMikdash because there's a mitzvah. Som tasim alecha melech. Shetehei emaso alecha. You have to have awe and reverence for the Melech Yehuda. So he sits while everyone else stands. I'm in the head of the Sanhedrin. I could do circles around this guy, that young punk. Who does he think he is? And I have to stand like everybody else? His ego couldn't tolerate that. So what does he do? He takes his military and he prevents the Jews from going to Yerushalayim for the regalim. He blocks off the routes to the Beis HaMikdash. And instead he sets up a temple in Beit El, the south of the Northern Empire, and in Dan, the north of the Northern Empire, right? Many of you have done the hike up in Dan. You can see Lebanon from there. It's up near the border. What's the point? Here you've got a person that caused these people to violate what? Caused the masses, 10 tribes, to violate Aliyas HaRegel and to bring korbanos outside the Beis HaMikdash, chutei chutz. And then these things led to Avodah Zarah, right? They were very shortly. He's the one that facilitated. Of course you're going to have Avodah Zarah when you have a million different places of worship. Not a million, when you have different places of worship. He brought down. There's a reason we call them the 10 lost tribes. What does Rabbi Akiva say in Sanhedrin? Aseres hashvatim einam chozrim. Those 10 tribes, they're not returning. They assimilated out. When they were driven off the land, they were so weak in their Yiddishkeit that they ended up assimilating out. Who's responsible for that? Yeravim ben Nevat. He's the one who, through his actions, that led to that. You can't have, I'm using vernacular terminology, he shouldn't have a penthouse in Gan Eden, a lichtige Gan Eden, and they should be burning in Gehenna. You can't have a situation like that. So God does not set up providentially, doesn't literally pave the path so that a Yeravim ben Nevat can do tshuva. The examples given here are, let's say that you had influence on someone. You could have caused someone either to do a mitzvah or you could have prevented them from doing an aveira because they respect you or they wouldn't want to offend you. And you didn't use your influence. It's not my business, you know what I mean? I got my own headaches, I got my own problems. If it's someone you have no influence over, then Kishem, the Gemara in Yevamos says, just like there's a mitzvah to give tochacha, to give rebuke, so too kach, there's a mitzvah shalom, not to give rebuke, because all you do is turn them off. But let's say you could influence the person. Now the example that the Rambam gives sometimes is a parent to a child. We know that in modern times, sometimes that's the last person that can give rebuke. Sometimes that's the kiss of death if the parent says it. It should be anybody but the parent. Right. Sometimes it is the parent, sometimes it's not. So you have to know. You know, we try to judge ourselves the best. But if I'm in a position where I could influence someone, get them to say a brach, or try to stop them from saying lashon hara, or stop them from being so cynical, and maybe give them a different perspective on looking at the world. Encourage them to do a little more, or prevent them from doing that. And I didn't. I'm responsible for their sin. Kol Yisrael arevim zelazeh. It's not just a slogan, serious concept. So Rambam gives that as an example. It's a great sin. When I cause someone else, I'm responsible, and could have prevented someone else or caused someone else to sin. Example he gives, Ha'omer echate v'ashuv. I'm going to sin and then I'll do tshuva. God gave me this system of tshuva, so I'm going to have the time of my life right now. I'm going to sin, I'll do tshuva. God's got to forgive me. If you pervert the whole system of tshuva, providentially, a person doesn't have the opportunity. The providence is not working to benefit, to facilitate that person doing tshuva. Halacha Beis, because we are out of time, is please, I would ask everyone to read it. It says there's certain things that basically, I'm going to just skim through it very quickly in a minute and a half. There are certain things that lock the path to tshuva. Someone who separates himself from the community. If you separate yourself from the community, then you don't participate. When the community is doing tshuva, when the community is growing, when the community has a certain area that they're working on, if you're not part of it, so you're not growing in that area. Someone who argues on the words of the sages, acholek al divrei chachamim, right? It's the words of chachamim, our chachmei hamasora, that gives us the insight into life, how to lead a perfected life. So if you attack them, you knock them, you know what I mean? You don't take them seriously. That's the tools towards perfecting oneself. Hamalig ala mitzvah, someone who mocks, who scorns and mocks. We don't understand every mitzvah. You know what? We don't have we don't have the infinite intellect. We're not the Almighty. We only know what we know. We have a limited, frail intellect. Just like in science and in medicine, we only know so much. Same thing is true when it comes to metaphysics. So what you want to have, instead of showing a little humility, we mock it. Very hard to do tshuva when you scorn and you mock something. What's the other examples? Someone who mocks or who demeans the chachamim. If you attack the rabbis, you attack the scholars, the pious people, they're the ones who, if you don't respect them, they're the ones who can help you do tshuva. Their lifestyle, their living example, their thoughts, their ideas, well, if you mock them, it's like it's a similar idea to mocking the mitzvahs. How can you ever have the path back? And likewise, the last one he gives, hasoneas hatochachos. You have a lot of people that are very threatened. They don't like to be rebuked. They don't like it when someone will, I don't want to say chastise, when someone will steer them, will try to correct them. They're very threatened. They don't like, they can't handle somebody criticizing them. How are you going to do tshuva if you can't handle criticism? If you can't deal with criticism, none of us are perfect. We all need someone. We all need people who can steer us in the right direction, who can give us constructive criticism. If you can't handle it, it's very hard to do tshuva. So that was the halacha base. And again, I apologize we went quickly through it. I'll tell you where we're going to end, and this is beautiful. We're right now, we actually do have 6 minutes left in the shiur. So let's end, we'll take 2.5 minutes of the 6. I want you to read halacha vav. Let's read it together. Beautiful halacha. The Rambam says the following. After he goes through the 5 categories that we just discussed, halachas aleph through hey, he gets to halacha vav. Kol elu advarim v'chayotze behem. These 24 phenomena, halacha vav. You see the 6 in English? The vav got cut off. The vav got cut off. You had that page. No, the back page. Kol elu hadvarim. Last paragraph. Yep. That's halacha vav. I apologize that it got cut off. Even though these 5 categories, there were 24 phenomena that fit into the 5 categories, even though they make it very difficult, they hold back the possibility for tshuva, but they don't totally preclude it. Ein monin osa. Ela im asa adam tshuva mehen hareze bal teshuva v'yesh lo chelek l'olam haba. If a person goes out of their way, even though providence may not be benefiting them, even though, there are a lot of things that make it very difficult. But if a person has the willpower and really sincerely wants to do tshuva, nothing precludes tshuva. Nothing prevents it. Beautiful idea here.
Even Machtes Rabim?
Even in, Machtes Rabim, you're not going to have providence working and supporting and making it easy for you. I'll give you an example. A simple example is, it's not exactly Machtes Rabim, but the Pharaoh, right? Look, everybody's telling him you're going to ruin the economy. You got a free labor source. Your whole economy is fueled by what? By this free labor source of the Jews. You let them go, what's going to happen? How are we going to produce? How are we going to be able to export what we're exporting? How are our fellow Egyptians going to have the same quality of life? It's very hard to do tshuva. Saddam Hussein, when you kill off anybody who disagrees with you and you got a bunch of yes men surrounding you, it's very hard to say we're going to give in to UN resolutions, or we're going to work with America, or we're going to allow weapons inspections. It's very hard to do that. When you've killed off anybody who disagrees with you, and everybody's saying, yeah, you're the man, you got to stand up. You show those stinking Westerners, those infidels. Yeah. But the Rambam says, if someone really wants to, if someone is sincere, and they really want to change and perfect themselves and improve themselves, in the end, there might be very significant hurdles, but nothing will withhold it. Nothing will stop a person. And then he ends off by saying what? Hareze bal teshuva v'yesh lo chelek olam haba. What does that mean, a bal teshuva? So we make a mistake. It's a big mistake we make. We have these terms, the BTs and the FFBs. These are the balei teshuva, these are the from birth. No such thing. According to the Rambam, if you had to have a bumper sticker, think about people when they drive, they put their bumper stickers. The bumper sticker we should put is, I am a Baal Teshuva. The highest compliment you can give somebody is they're a Baal Teshuva. There's nothing to do with what you were born or how you were born. Rav Moshe Feinstein is a Baal Teshuva. Rav Aaron Kotler, Rabbi Soloveitchik, these are Baalei Teshuva. The ultimate experience, the ultimate existence is that what? A person perfects themselves, they partake of the great chesed to improve, to make themselves better, to influence those around them, to make the world a better place by becoming a Baal Teshuva. That's the ultimate, that's a great, great madrega. And it's not a negative, it's a badge of honor. It's a badge, it's a great badge of honor. And so this year, what's our bracha? Our bracha is that we should all become Baalei Teshuva. The Rambam's Baal Teshuva. I want to wish everyone a good, meaningful year, a Gemar Chasima Tova, and thank you.